What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of A Thinking Man's podcast. If you're joining us on YouTube, please subscribe to the Muscle Media Network channel. Like the video, leave us a comment, share the video with a friend, ring the bell so that you're notified every time we post a new video. As always, this episode is brought to you by Kodiak Bodybuilding Apparel. Train hard, die strong. Big shout out to Chris Cirillo for supporting the show, supporting both of us as bodybuilders. We appreciate it. You can check them out at KodiakBodybuildingApparel.com. And after a little hiatus, Tommy Styles, we are back.
Back in action, fresh
What's
off of
up?
a Metropolitan showing. How does it feel to be back on stage?
It was awesome, man. It was awesome to be back up there. It's funny though, like it was awesome to be up there, but then you get asked like, man, how was it? What was it like? And like you don't even really remember being up there. Like I didn't even, I got moved a couple times and I didn't even realize that I ended up in like the position on stage that I ended up. I didn't even really remember being up there. So it was good. It was good to get the kind of knock the rust off. And I timed my season in a way where you could qualify before a national show 2 weeks before. And then it's like, okay, like this is pretty much how you're going to look. You can make little tweaks or, that's pretty much it. But I got 21 weeks now to make improvements. So it was nice to go up there, see what needed to improve, go through a full prep process, but then also still basically have another full prep ahead of me because there are little things about it that you almost, 3 years away, you almost forget that are how crucial they could be at the end. Just with how early you start like multiple hard rounds of posing practice and running through them at different points of the day to see yourself, whether it's post workout, before bed, all these different things. Directly training glutes, like all these like little things that are a given when you're in it year after year are things that I can definitely improve on. So I'm looking forward to having like a good little rebound here with Justin. He's kind of known for that. And then because there's things that I have time to improve on. So like my chest, I think the number one thing, my chest needs to come up. I mean, I had a year where I got gyno surgery, and then I had at one point in the prep, I jinxed myself. I mean, I remember telling you, I'm like, man, this is the first time in so long my pec has been healthy in prep. And it probably wasn't a week later that I felt a pretty gnarly twinge. And then it was like, you go 2 or 3 weeks without training it at all. And then you come back and you're training it lightly, and then go figure, it looks thin on stage. So, no, it's good though. It was cool to get back up there. And, I was happy with the look that I brought more than anything else. You can't do anything about where you place, but it was cool to have a coach that doesn't back down, like you and I were talking about. Like, having this much more muscle than I did the last time, it just required an insane amount of food to keep up with down the stretch. So having Justin just continuing to push that, and then being able to bring like a pretty muscular look to the stage really for the first time ever was cool. It's cool seeing some of the photos and feeling like you look like a bodybuilder. I mean, we had one super heavyweight in the class because he was by himself, so they put him in with the heavies, and he was like an ox of a human. He was like 6'6" or 6'7" and 280. But other than that, I got tons of feedback from people that were at the show that I was the biggest guy in the show besides that guy. So that was a first for me, and kind of a cool box to check as a bodybuilder, 10 years into it. So yeah. What about you, man? You were over in Europe, you're international. So how was that?
Man of mystery.
Mutant
Europe was
sponsored athlete rolling with all the big dogs.
Europe was fun. I'm proud to be an American. Let me say that we got it good here. So if you complain about America, go somewhere else, and you'll realize how awesome it is here. But it was cool. Got some good training in at Dino's. Lived the traveling bodybuilding lifestyle, which is it's not all it's cracked up to be, man. I like my bubble. I like my stores, my coffee maker, all that. So getting ready to go to Michigan I leave tomorrow, so they got the Fuad Abiyad show, the Detroit Pro-Am this weekend. I have a client doing classic physique and maybe open heavyweights. We'll see. So we're there for that. Stoked to see the show. Wish
Yeah,
there was
he's
more guys
peeled.
in it. Yeah, shout out Brian. He's translucent, so
Yeah.
just got to land the plane. If you want the secret to getting in shape, just get a job personal training and keep your steps around 16,000 a day every day, and it'll fall off. So
No, you're right though. It'll be cool. Like, it's cool being out there with a client to peek them in person. But that I think it's going to be a hell of a show too.
yeah, I've had some messages from some guys that are in Michigan that are doing it, or they got friends doing it. Because I've kind of fallen out of touch with a lot of Michigan people
Yeah.
in waves over the years since I moved here, and it looks to be a pretty decent show for an April show. I've heard there's a good number of guys in classic and bodybuilding doing it, which excites me just because, I don't ever want to stand in a lineup by myself or with a few people. I don't ever want my clients to. And I'm just a fan of bodybuilding. I want to, especially open, I want to see good turnouts at all the shows. It kills me when I see a show and there's 7 bodybuilders and, hopefully collectively year to year, we start seeing if Tyler Mannion or others involved in the higher up can improve the overall experience for competitors at shows and make deeper lineups again. Someone smarter than me is in charge of figuring that out. But it's always, I'm always a fan of if there's a lot of bodybuilders at shows or there's good classes. We were just talking on fire. Like if you can go into a lineup and get moved or even have multiple call outs, that's an exciting time. You don't always get that. So
Yeah. And then the pro show should be like the whole experience should be cool. I had planned on going out there myself. And then, to be honest with you, man, after a long prep and, spending all the money that you do to prep, I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, Detroit in April, I could probably just go on vacation for this money.
easily.
So,
Easily.
but I think it'll be cool I'm almost expecting like an expo like environment. And between the guys that they have competing in the pro show and then just the guys that are going out, meet and greet, all this other stuff, it should be pretty damn cool.
Yeah, no, I expect it. I mean, they have a whole, I believe, an expo day, like a 9 to 5 scheduled. So
Oh, right on.
it should be pretty cool. There's a lot of Fuad's whole crew that he has on the podcast will be there. Samson will be there. So there's a lot of big names there. So
Dr. Mike will be there selling protein bars.
yeah, he'll be helping with peaks. So that's all with me, man. I'm just long off season. Who knows when that ends? Maybe next year, maybe the year after. I'm just gonna keep growing until I'm ready. So
yeah.
Speaking of long off seasons, you took 2.5 years away from the stage.
Yeah.
Chris Cirillo actually wanted me to talk to you about that because a lot of guys would have struggled to keep doing that. I would say a 12-month off season is after you've got some skin in the game. It's not daunting to do a 12-month off season. 18 months you get the itch or you get a little tired of being heavy. You're tired of eating for sure. But longer than that, it's like you really almost like have ended one career and started a new one because there's so much of a gap between the last time you were on stage, the amount of tissue you're now carrying. Old prep pictures and old contest photos have no validity. You can almost delete them off your phone because they're not even valuable anymore. Old prep notes, anything like that. So what was the driving force for a long off season, just for some of the younger listeners that think you just get on stage every year?
Man, I did that. I did, just the typical, like I'm a competitor, and once a year I kind of just haphazardly pick a show that falls in a decent timeline or whatever the case is. This April 2017, and then it's like, okay, I'll do June of 2018. And there was really no thought or strategy into it. And just one time after another, it's like I'm looking pretty similar most of the time, man. And it's like, I'm 5'11" and 3/4 or whatever I am, which is tall for bodybuilding. And I got off stage in May of 2021. I went to Junior USA's to kind of just test the waters and see where I was. And, shorter, more muscular guy beat me in the light heavyweight class. I'm 192 pounds. And just seeing the photos after, I mean, I was in good conditioning. I was proud of the conditioning that I brought, but it's not a glute contest. I got into this because I looked up to people that were fucking imposing and massive. And I'm like, man, I can't just keep doing this. I can't keep doing the same schedule over and over again, because it just hasn't worked for me. For some people, they can just compete once a year, put on 10 pounds every year. And, it's just like a given. And for me, that just wasn't the case. It almost was like the death of a whole different bodybuilder stepping off stage at that point, because there was a lot of stuff training wise that I had to mature away from. And there was a lot of stuff that I learned right around that same time too. I was really diving into like just more of the biomechanics side of things. Now, I don't want to say that and have everyone go with the optimal, weak ass training stuff, but there was just gaps in my knowledge of training that I kind of filled right at that same time. And so I was like, man, I just need an extended period of time applying all of this. Like, I can't dive back into diets knowing how much it takes out of you, both in terms of like time, resources, money, like what it does to your body. I mean, like when you get like really super peeled, like, man, it could be weeks or months, depending on who's helping you, before you're productive again in the gym. And the person that was helping me before that, or at that time, that was the case. Like, not only was I in a contest prep where I was too thin, way too thin, but then it was almost like this very slow reverse diet where I'm still like starving and weak in the gym weeks, months later. So I just needed a different approach, and I knew I needed time to apply it. And, the stage is almost just like a landmark, or just like almost like a box to check to go show the progress and then get back to training and growing. And, we love to train, and I just really embraced it. Like, I embraced being big and strong and productive in the gym. And, so that was the thinking. Like, I knew that I had good shape and a big structure that could hold the muscle. And, I just needed time. I just needed more time. And, I was just determined to do that. I was just, man, there's like a couple very specific pictures that I had saved, like that caught me at angles at that Junior USA show, that I just looked very thin. And they just like burned into my mind. Like, I was like disgusted by them almost. So, there were points where, yeah, it's, the off season can be difficult when you do it at like an extreme level with the food, and even just like kind of abusing your body, like trying to put new tissue onto it. And then also a big piece of fuel that I used for a long time was that previous coach that I had, like, told me outright, like, eventually you could be good in classic, but like, you're never going to be an open bodybuilder. And I just was determined to prove him wrong. So I took the time and, came back, and I was 224 at weigh-ins on Saturday, pretty much the biggest guy in the show. So I think, I still have to improve. I think I could be sharper through some of my back poses. And, I talked to Justin Harris, who helped me. And I think that's just a matter of being more full on stage, because there is just more muscle. But it's satisfying to say, like, I got messages from people and shit that knew that that message had been delivered from my previous coach, and they were like, man, I saw you on stage, I was there today, and that certainly isn't classic. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple things there, but that's really it. I mean, I was so determined to improve. Like, that's all that mattered to me, was improving. So you know to the degree that I needed it, that was just the appropriate amount of time. I mean, I don't think moving forward, I'm hoping I probably won't ever need that long away from the stage again, because I've really closed the gap on where I need to be. But at some point I needed to make a big leap forward, and that was just it was basically time to shit or get off the pot. Like, I needed to make that leap now, and it took 3 years, but it was worth the investment.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the pictures show it, especially when you show the comparisons from where you were at 3 years ago. But we have a lot of younger listeners. Some people haven't competed. Some people have done a few shows, one show. Some people are seasoned and have done many shows as us. Some people have done more shows than us. So there's a wide variety of people here, but density equals time spent at a certain weight. That's one of my favorite things Dante said in his forums, or I've seen it before, and I've heard him repeat it. So, the idea that you're going to spend say 8 months and you're going to hit a peak weight, and somehow that's going to translate to all this extra added stage weight. If you took 2.5 years away from the stage to add, 30 pounds, that put that into perspective for some of you guys that have these lofty numbers and these lofty goals. And I can remember being younger and thinking, like, all right, I was a light heavyweight this year. If I do my off season, in 14 months, I'll be a heavyweight. And it was like, no, yeah. Jack, you got more years ahead of you before that happens. But, sometimes you got to learn the hard way. But, the off season is, that's where things happen. That's where you can spend the time to focus on learning how to train and getting good at it. Training is a skill. And that's what we've always tried to keep as the main message on this podcast for 2 years now is, the food is the food. You're going to push copious amounts of it and get really sick of it. But the training is what creates the stimulus for the change. And, the drugs are going to be, if they're involved, they're the cherry on top. I train with a guy who's natural. And he makes progress year to year. So you can make progress as a natural. You just have to kind of turn off how you look at bodybuilding and maybe not focus so much on enhanced guys and keep an eye on the natural bodybuilding circuit. But at the end of the day, the training and spending time heavy and uncomfortable, and that goes for girls too. That's where you're going to truly build tissue. That's not just going to disappear the second you start a prep.
Yeah, and then like that uncomfortable, like, new weight is, it's like solidifying the new tissue, but what it is like, it gives you a shell to live in that can handle the progressive training that you need to do to push new tissue on your frame. Like, the stuff that I was doing in the gym at 265 for months, like, my body at 240 wouldn't have been able to handle that. Like, it had to be 265 to handle that. And I was there for, I was probably 260 plus with not a ton of change in body weight for like probably 6 or 7 months, I would say. And really the big change, like, even the food didn't necessarily change, and point blank, the drugs didn't change. I had probably a full 16-week stretch where my diet and drugs didn't change. The body weight didn't really change. And what was driving progress was that my training was progressive. My training went up every single week. So that's how I knew that there was progress, like, happening. So yeah, it is. I've heard it described as like the training is the match that lights the flame for everything else. So Um, yeah, and like you said too, like you had mentioned Dante, because I had just mentioned this. Um, like I remember in one of the things that he wrote was like almost like a guide or like a blueprint for people as to, if you want to be in this weight class on stage, like this is how much you need to weigh and how long you need to carry it in the
Yeah.
off season. So it was like, I remember it being like, okay, if you want to be like a true heavyweight in shape on stage, like, I forget what exactly the number was, but I'm pretty sure he said that you have to get to hold, walk around at, and then solidify 260 plus or 265 plus. Um, and in this case, at least, like my prep process was good and I had a good coach. And so that was the case. I was 260 to 268 at the peak of my off season, and ended up right at 224 at weigh-ins. So
Yeah, no, it has to do with your height and square inches.
yeah, true.
But I think I have it as a photo in my phone somewhere.
Mm.
The key too is, in that 2.5 years, how many times did you diet?
I think I was just looking at this because someone had asked me, like, do you think the 3 years, 2.5 year off season was the best way to do it, or would you have done a full contest prep halfway through, or whatever the case is? So I just went back and like looked at my notes, and I did two diets. One of them was 6 weeks and one of them was 8 weeks. The one that was 8 weeks was just that duration because it coincided with a cruise. So I needed to be on a cruise for 8 weeks. So I just dieted for 8 weeks. Um, so, we're talking, over 100 weeks of an off season, and 14 of them at different points total were spent dieting. And even so, like that was like, I'm not getting down anywhere near to where I would have if I had done a contest prep. So my training never suffered. Like, yes, I was in a deficit and I had cleaned up my body fat to get ready to grow again. But all the while, I was still just churning forward with progress in the gym, which I think does go a long way too towards like solidifying the weight that you have put on, the muscle that you have put on, like while you diet it, while you pull some of the fat off. So, and that's just per my context. I think someone like you could probably do a full 2.5 or 3 years and never need to, like, it would almost be counterproductive to do that. Um, I
Well, it could
had,
depend, but I think
yeah,
today's, if we're speaking to today's crop of younger people or younger
right,
training ages, everybody wants to run for a cutting phase as soon as they feel the least bit of resistance, or I'm full
right,
and I have to eat a meal.
yeah,
Abs aren't there. I'm lethargic. Like these are all things that you have to, just like dieting, fatigue, and hunger, and all the things you have to put up with in a contest prep. You have to flip the manual and realize that's what you have to put up with in the off season or in a growing phase in order to get to that, to unlock that next level. And I was just talking with this or to my training partner about this. And I said, there's no point in my mind where I set up mini cuts where I plan them ahead for my guys. I just kind of go off their feedback. If we hit a point where their appetite completely disappears, all right, that we've run the course here. But if it's just like I'm having trouble getting the meals down, I'm full for this meal, it's like that's what you're signing up for. That's part of it.
yeah,
So I intentionally asked you that question because I knew the answer, but I wanted to point out that the large percentage of the weeks of your time away from the stage were spent in a surplus. They were spent heavy. They were spent tracking your training performance and pushing it forward. Um,
yeah,
that's bodybuilding. It's
yeah.
not. It's fun if you enjoy that whole process, but day to day, there are a lot of periods where you could look at this and be like, man, this isn't that fun because a lot of it's how much discomfort can I learn to take on in order to get to where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, I've seen it too. Like it's, with all the new style stuff where it's like, based on mesocycle lengths and, I'm going to do a 8-week mass and then 2 weeks of active rest and then a 4-week mini cut. And then I'm going to go back to massing. It's like, man, muscle building is such a slow ass process. Like you need to just dive into that phase and live there. Like it's not, you can't just drop in casually and collect a couple pounds of muscle in 8 weeks and then jump out and only, remove the fat and then jump back in and collect a couple pounds of muscle. Like in theory, that sounds great. But if it was that simple, everyone would be super jacked and lean all the time. Like, I mean, like if you map out like my stats on how I did it, it was basically like the average would have been basically like 7 weeks of dieting for every 15 months of just continuous surplus. Which is like, man, I see people that are doing like a 1-to-1 ratio where they build for 8 weeks and then diet for 8 weeks, or any of these ratios, 2-to-1, 3-to-1. Like it should just be like it should be a dire situation. If you're in a position like me, like you want to be as big as you possibly can, you want to be the most muscular stage competitive bodybuilder as you can. Man, it should be that you have been left no other choice and things are so dire that you have to diet. That's the only time that it should be. And that's if you're, again, in my situation, you must take a huge leap and you have a long time allocated to do it. Like if you're somebody, like you said, even if you're doing like a 12-month off season, full 12-month off season before, man, I would be prepared to not diet for 1 second of that.
Yeah.
Like unless you started like as a fat ass, like, just hypothetically, like in a typical scenario, like, you competed, you were in really good stage shape. And then you're going to have a full 12 months from that point before you consider starting another prep. There should not be a moment of dieting in that.
Yeah. No, I think moments of pulling back will kind of present themselves with life. Life will happen and it'll be like, all right, I'm sick. That's your pullback period. It's like, hey, I got
Right.
brutally sick. You're not forcing food when you're sick.
Right.
You're not training when you're sick. That's your period of like, all right, I'm pulling back. If you align some time pulling back calories with cruising off of a cycle, that's fine as long as the direction is always forward. But I've just noticed working with a lot of younger guys that it's like they almost want to dip a toe in the water and on the deep end of the pool because that's where the size is. And then the minute that they start to get cold, it's like, let's go back to the shallow end where it's warmer. And it's like, you can't diet every time you feel a little bit of discomfort from pushing food. You will gain no muscle and you're literally just looking the same every single year. You might just be a little bit drier or fuller, and maybe there was a 1.5 pound stage difference, and you're going to dig through your phone to find comparison pictures that you can post. And I thought about this the other day, like how many iPhone versions have we been through? Like when I started competing, right, I had the iPhone 4. If I look at those pictures now versus the iPhone 15 or whatever I have, like the clarity, everything is way better. So did you actually get better or did you just get a new phone over that period? So
That's a
stay
great
honest
point.
with yourself. But
Yeah.
the long off season it's only hard to accept if you don't embrace it. And it's not what if muscle isn't what you want, but if you've done enough shows or you do a show and it's like it's pretty easy to see. And as long as you have a coach there, that's like, I tell all my guys, like, hey, if you're competing this year and you're someone who needs size and this is something you want to do, we need 2025 off and we'll come back in 2026. That's just how it goes. You can work on other things in life. You can improve your financial situation because it costs money, but we've talked about all that. But I think making the most of your time away from the stage means not running away from food and progressive training and all the discomfort that comes with growing. Because, from a training perspective, I love the off season. I love getting huge. I love being huge. I don't get near the amount of injuries. But from a life standpoint, I love dieting. My brain functions better. I'm quicker. I'm more agile. I can do my chores better. So there's pros and cons to both, but if you have to align with what's your end goal. And if you're new to this, it doesn't matter what your peak was like. It doesn't matter about your condition. Like every new bodybuilder or in any division, you just need more tissue.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, your case is good for people to see in the case of like, maybe don't commit to 2.5 years if it doesn't work with you, but at least commit to 12 months and then maybe extend it to 18, or let your coach make the call. But another point that I extracted from what you said is how many weeks Justin just kept everything the same.
Yeah.
Now, today's average client would take that as my coach isn't paying attention, my coach doesn't care about me. That's wrong. Not saying it's all like you might have a shit coach. Absolutely. There's way too many people coaching that shouldn't be. But if your coach has a resume of putting people on stage and has a resume of growing people in off seasons, then you need to trust the process and understand that changes don't need to happen every week. In fact, a good program that you're following, there shouldn't be a ton of changes that you need week to week. It should be, hey, good set of picks, keep training hard, keep progressing, talk to you in 7. That's really how it should go. So don't, you know, if you're getting responses like that from a coach, don't think he's not paying attention. You're in a wave of momentum and nothing needs to change. We've just gotten so bamboozled by things online and people that are really good at marketing and, you know, all these new things that even we use in our coaching services with the looms and the videos and all that. Like, it's, guys, this stuff isn't that exciting. If you're eating in a caloric surplus and you're training progressively, you know, the drugs eventually hit a point where they just stay the same, like you said, for weeks on weeks. They might progressively go up over the years, but it's not like incremental 10 milligram changes every week. You know, you just got to buckle up and make the most of everything you have in your control each week.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes wonder how much of us, like the guys that are coaching full time, how much of us feel a pressure to make changes, even when you see somebody that's just rolling a momentum wave. And like, as a coach, all you want to say is, man, you're nailing it. Like, we don't have to change anything. Like, this looks great. But then like you look back through your log with that same client, it's like you told them that 4 weeks in a row, and you start to sweat a little bit as a coach, and you start to think like, man, is this guy about to just up and quit and find somebody that'll give him a new update every week? Or I mean, it's the same thing with training, dude. Like, I talked to you, I sent you a picture, sent a pictures at the end of last May. And I was like, hey man, like, what are the 3 biggest weaknesses that you see? And the first one that you responded with was like the density of my back. Like, you were like, you know, it just looks like you need to pull something from the floor. And I had the same back routine from that point at the end of May of 23 until 2 weeks out from the show in March of 24, where I did the exact same thing every week, including pulling from the floor as the last exercise. And it's like, man, I write full on training plans out for clients, and they'll do 6 weeks of it. And they check in and they're like, man, everything is great. Love the setup. I'm getting crazy pumps. The body parts that I needed to grow, they're growing. I'm just curious, when do I get my next training plan? And it's like, did you just hear yourself? Like, if everything is on the money, like, why would we ever change anything? But that's just the, you know, I guess that's just the time that we live in. But you're right, man. Like, when I was going through that stretch with Justin, every week he might give me like a little piece of feedback, a little carrot, like, hey man, like, looks good, like shape still looks good, like body weight's up a pound, like nothing needs to change. I always, whether it's contest prep, off season, whatever, personally for me, I have always taken that like I did my job and things look great as a client. Like, man, I'm nailing it. I'm nailing it so good. He doesn't even have to change anything. I'm making so much progress on what he has set up. He doesn't need to change anything. I'm nailing it. So yeah, I think there's probably just like a lack of patience, or maybe there's something where, you know, they think the next update is where the magic happens. The next update is the one that where the secrets come out.
Yeah.
And it's just the secret is just time.
Oh, it's the same with fat loss and putting on size. It's just there's a lot more visuals that can be seen with
Right.
fat loss after a certain amount of time dieting. So you're more enticed to dig harder when you start to see it. Whereas it's hard to see off season change, especially if you're newer. I mean, I remember, you know, the first 6 years of being a competitor and never seeing anything in the off season, really. I mean, not
Yeah.
even being in a position to where I was checking in that frequently with pictures. It was like
Yeah.
every 2 weeks tops. There would be periods
Yeah.
where I didn't. So, you know, it's definitely a maturation thing. I think the biggest thing, if you want to tap into your potential, is just stick with it. Stick with the basics, and eventually, you know, you'll start to look like a bodybuilder year round, for whatever your prospective division is. But in terms of, there's definitely a pressure to, you know, as a coach, I go through it now where I got a guy cutting who came to me not following a diet at all, and I get him on a diet, and it's like metabolism starts firing because he's eating more food, he's training, he's pretty active on his own. Weight's just falling off every week, and I'm like, man, we are 12 weeks into this and I've made no changes, but he's down almost 18 pounds. And I'm like, I have to tell him, I'm like, dude, I am not like just taking your money and doing nothing. You were just progressing at such a good rate that I do not want to change anything because nothing's broken. I was like, I promise
Right.
you, you're going to hit a plateau point where you need me to make changes. But that's how it is, because you know, the times we're in where it's like you feel obligated to like cater to the client in order to keep them bought in. But in that case, it's just somebody who was never following a structured diet to who's now following a structured diet. He's fueling his training, so he's training harder, he's moving more, and it's just a perfect storm. So, and he had the body fat to lose. But yeah, I go through it. I think as an athlete or as a competitor, if you're younger hearing that, you need to ask yourself, am I more concerned with progress over the long term, or am I more concerned with frequent changes for the sake of dopamine? And honestly, answer that for yourself. And if it's changes you want just for the sake of changes, communicate that to a coach. I mean, you'll get coaches that will just, hey, we're going to change from this rice to this rice, or we'll change from red skin potatoes to that. Like, you'll get coaches that will do that just to appease your need for changes. But the training is a good point. I mean, I think probably decades ago, for sure in the 90s, and maybe before that too, or definitely before that, but they didn't have all the gym equipment that we have available to us today with the primes and the arsenals and the Nautilus and all this new stuff that's coming out. They just had whatever was in the gym, and they made it work. And even me, I'm in Candyland when it comes to what I can choose to train on. And sometimes I have to like slap myself and say, hey, there's still barbells, there's still dumbbells. Like you can make that stuff work too. You don't need everything, doesn't need to be prime or whatever you have access to. So
In your gym, it could be, but it doesn't need
yeah,
to be.
you know, the frequency of changing out exercises is why guys aren't be able to buy into progress within their training, because you're running away, you know, 6 to 12 weeks into a movement, when it was like same as you right now. I'm in the off season. I haven't really touched movements at all since November. We're in April. I find every possible way to squeeze as much progress out of something before I switch it, because you want to get good at those movements. You want to develop the skill. That way you don't need like my warm-ups on some of the machines I'm doing now are one rep, okay, work set. Like I've been on that machine for 20 weeks straight. I don't need to feel it anymore. I feel it. I know it. It's ingrained in my brain as much as driving to the gym is. So, but you can never get to that point if you're running away from exercises too soon in the program.
That, and I think another thing is like, man, if you, whether it was your coach or you do your own training, like you should have thoughtfully chose this movement because it fits a need on your physique. Like this movement is going to do something for your physique that's needed. So then, you know, how much change do you think how much change could possibly have happened to your physique in 6 weeks, 8 weeks before you're going to go and switch it out? It's like, no, like you chose this for a reason. Like I started pulling from the floor because I needed density in my mid and lower back. Like if at the 12-week mark of doing that, I was like, like maybe I'll swap this out for you know, a rack pull or, you know, maybe something just different. Maybe do it off the Smith machine or something. It's like, man, like my back is not going to look much different the next time I diet if I've just bailed on this 12 weeks in. Like, you know, you have to give that movement an opportunity to do what you essentially hired it to do. Like you brought this movement in to do a job, let it do its job. Like let it build, you know, you chose incline dumbbell because your upper chest and your front delts were behind. Like let that movement go build your upper chest and your delts. Like don't bail on it so soon. It should almost be, man, it should almost be like, again, like you were given no choice by the time it was time to switch out a movement. Like whether it was like, you know, repetitive connective tissue injury just because of the way that this movement is, that's probably the main one. Maybe in contest prep you get to a point where it's just like the numbers have stalled and even started to decline. Like, okay, that's a time to maybe consider a new movement. But especially in the off season, man, like that, I didn't really have that happen. I didn't really have like stalls happen. Like it was
Yeah.
like, you know, you might have maybe one session where it's like you were underslept or, you know, underhydrated because you had obligations that you had to have later in the day. So you trained at a different time and you didn't hit your mark for 1 week. It's like, okay, well, next week I'm going to make sure everything's perfect and I'm blowing this out of the water. Like it's something that I think even more so than like diet and drugs, like training, man, like just set it and let it do what you had originally had in mind that it was going to do for you. Like give it the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. No, I'm in 100%. I mean, when I send a training plan to a client in my head, I'm like, all right, you're probably good for 6 months minimum before we need to revisit this. We can talk about
Yeah.
it in check-ins, but
Right.
and
And especially initially, like if, you know, if maybe you just swing and miss with like, you know, you're not there living with a guy. So it's like, you know, hey, this high single arm curl, like it bothers my elbow and it just doesn't connect with the bicep. It's like, okay, well then we'll find something else. Like, but you know, if you've started it and you're 6, 8 weeks in, and again, like I've gotten these messages where they're like, man, everything's great. Like, I can't believe the progress I'm making. And then they want, in the same breath, they want the new next training plan. It's like, man, what is the thinking here when you ask me for this? Like, I don't understand.
yeah, no, the human body loves consistency. It loves consistent wake up times. I mean, you know, back to Brian, for example, I knew this, but he just let me know the other day that he's like, hey, my water, my salt's been the exact same all prep. I've been training after meal to all these details that have been the exact same for 4 months. So when I'm with him in Detroit, it's not like, oh, I've been training at 8 p.m., but we got a peak at 9 a.m. It's like, nope,
Right.
he's aligned himself on his own. I didn't put all this into his head, but you know, there's enough information out there that if you want to get good at bodybuilding, you pick it up. I've heard all these guys, you know, pros talking about my day starts at this time, I train after this meal, like, and that you don't have to have your own schedule to be able to set that lifestyle up. If you're someone who has to work 9 to 5, then that means I work 9 to 5. I do whatever my obligations are. I train at 6:30. No excuses. Your body wants consistent routine. If it knows what time it's going to train, it will naturally be ready to perform at that time. And it definitely, like, I've had sessions where even if the training time altered by a few hours, it was like, man, it was really hard to hit the logbook numbers today. I didn't beat anything. Or if, getting off a plane the day before and going into the gym the next day, or coming off of a sickness, it's like, man, I feel like I've never lifted weights. Like, you're going to have periods like that. But there's definitely grooves that you can hit where it's like, man, everything has improved for 10 weeks in a row, every movement, every week. But you gotta stick with things to get in those grooves. And one of my favorite words that people use is marinate. You let things marinate, let your training marinate, let your body weight marinate, let your cycle marinate, whatever you're doing, let it just marinate and ride that. That's, you're not necessarily maintaining, but you're just riding the midline and moving forward with progress.
Yeah, you're just letting it soak in, Yeah, I love that. I use that too with people because it kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. Where it's like, hey man, like we just made diet changes 2 weeks ago. I can see that the progress is happening. Like, let's let this marinate for a little bit. Like, I don't want to jump the gun and change the recipe on us here. So yeah, all great points. And I think just one like analogy that I had in my head, like, going back to the long off season thing, I just think this might help people visualize it. It did for me. I said it before, like it was an investment, right? Like that time away was an investment. And it was almost like, you're making a deposit to a bank. Like you're making a deposit over and over and over again. And the longer or more that you deposit, the bigger your purchase can be when it's time to withdraw it, right? So it's like, you take a 6-month off season, that's not that many deposits. So, you're gonna pull that money out. You don't have that much purchasing power when it's time to take the money out. Whereas, someone takes 3 years and they nail it, like, yeah, that's why I've gotten like some of the messages or some of the recognition that I've gotten from people, like 32 pounds of stage weight in 3 years. Like that's a big purchase. It took a lot of investment to get there. So I would just say, like, we've said it a million times on this show in 2 years. If you play the long game, you win in the end. Like, that's just it. Like, winners think in long-term strategy, right? Like, it's very easy to want things here and now. Instagram and social media put a lot of pressure on people, whether it's, you want to talk about like posting yourself, or I think the big one is like seeing other people and their progress and their rates of progress and, their before and after pictures online. That puts a lot of pressure on people to where they think they need to be on someone else's schedule, which, you find out when you go to an expo or a real bodybuilding show and see some of these people in real life. You realize that it's all been a gimmick for the internet. But when you take time to really improve your physique, it pays off, and then no one can take that from you. And when people see you in real life, there's no denying it. So, for young people listening, people that need to take a leap, like we talked about earlier, I think it's one of the best things that you can do. Like, no one listening to this show is too big or is too muscular for their physique, like their division of choice or weight class. So, if you need to take a leap, or, you aren't at the level that you want to be at eventually, like a longer off season is what gets you closer to that. Competing every year is not.
Yeah. And the easiest way to do that too, if you don't want to like feel anxiety about the future, is don't even set a timeline. Just focus
Yeah.
on being in control of what you do today. And then tomorrow, string a week into 2 weeks and three. I mean, you'd be surprised. I think Phil Biz talked about this recently, and I believe it wholeheartedly. There's so many people that never achieve 6 months of not missing.
Yep.
And that's doable. It's doable to go 6 months without getting sick enough to where you have to take off training and miss meals and all that. It's doable to get up at the same time every day and go to bed at the same time every day and for 6 months. It's very doable to create a 6-month wave. And everything we just talked about on the show is about a 2.5-year off season. But imagine where you would be if for 180 days you did every single thing you were supposed to do every single day.
Yeah.
The sky's the limit there. You don't know, because a lot of people have never done it. And I was one of them at one point. So I can say that and call it out, because when I finally did get a 6-month block of like in the off season, not prep was always easy for me not to miss.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people learn how to prep before they learn how to off season, because it's easier. It just requires more mental fortitude. And as long as you can get into the mental side of it, you get the bug. The off season is a whole other animal that, it took me a few years of competing to finally understand what it meant. I was like, wow, this is way harder than prep. But you get that first 6-month surge of progression in an off season. Not only will your physique change and show it, but how you carry yourself, your whole lifestyle will have changed, because you're now living a pure growth mindset. You might have distanced yourself from people who don't adopt that mindset. A lot of things will change, and I can attest to it. I remember going through it. Life does happen. You improvise, adapt, and overcome, but 6 months should be an initial goal of maybe the off season's 2 years, but I'm just going to be perfect for 6 months. I don't care what I have to do, and then reset and go from there.
It will build your confidence in what you are capable of as well. Like, I know for me, like, man, this didn't happen where I took a leap like this, in my first 3 years of bodybuilding, where it's like, kind of easy to make that kind of leap. So as the years kind of started to come together and I kind of looked the same at most of my shows, I was like, man, maybe it's just not in the cards. Like, maybe I don't have that big leap in me, and then you have a coach that you've been with for years, and we're part of their business and all this stuff. And he tells you outright, like, you're never going to be an open bodybuilder. It brings a lot of doubt where you're like, fuck, man, like, I guess I just don't have it in me. But you set aside that time and you just nail it. Like you said, you have no idea what you're capable of if you nail 6 months, and then you go do it. And then the tune might suddenly change. The rhetoric in your mind about what you think you're capable of could change completely. And then that's when you can really change things moving forward, because, you go make a leap in 6 months, then you're hungry and motivated to say, well, fuck, if I did this in 6 months, what's a year going to get? Like, if I just nail the next year, like, I might be unrecognizable the next time I get on stage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in your hands. Like, I remember seeing Matt Jansen put up a quote years ago where he said this, on like Instagram story or whatever. And he was like, there's so many of you that don't even realize that you're one off season away from making a name for yourself. And I had that as the background of my phone for probably a year. There was these different little things, these little phrases or interactions that I had that would drive me at different times. But, having a message like that, like seeing that and thinking that, that was a big one. And then having somebody tell you that you can't do something. I mean, that should be all that you need.
Oh, absolutely. That's going to stick with you in all the moments where it's just you and your own internal dialogue. That I'm sure that message was like loud and clear. So, but
Yeah.
the takeaway from this episode for sure is long off seasons, because I'm seeing people who did shows after I did last year who are already starting preps for this year, and it makes zero sense to me. It makes zero sense to me how they can be a person with an iPhone and be on the same internet that we are, and think that they're ready for that, and also that they can have coaches to allow that. Because I would have a hard time. I wouldn't have a hard time. I would not keep my mouth shut if I had a client who I told needed a long time away from the stage, wanting to compete. At the end of the day, I might just say, hey, you're not going to be any better or any different. But if competing is what you want to do, I provide a service. But if you're in the business of getting better and being drastically different the next time you're on stage, you have no business being on stage this year. I have a hard time seeing it just continually like play out, or people that, we talk about, you took 2.5 years away, you never bailed. You never were like, fuck, I need to prep. I got the itch. That's the least favorite thing I hate, is when people say I have the itch. I don't
Yeah.
have the itch. I haven't competed since July. And it's like, that's not even on my thought. Like, if you asked me to start a prep next week, I would be like, there's no way. I cannot
Right.
like flip that
Couldn't
switch right.
couldn't pay you to do it. Like, this doesn't align with
No,
what I
no
need.
chance, dude.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
what I need. And like, I'm not even mentally at that point of being able to enter that realm,
Yeah.
because like you
That
said,
one,
it's exhausting.
the itch comment is one that I always know that someone's on the verge of giving up on their off season. Like, if I see that as the caption or something, or the other famous one is like, someone's been away from the stage for a little bit, and they need to make progress. They told us that they were going to stay away and make the progress. And then they post like a throwback of themselves in prep, and they're like, this plus 10 pounds next time. I always see that, and I'm like, famous last words. Like, this guy is showing up exactly the same as last time. There's no way.
Yeah, no, that's it. Some even take it further and say 20.
Yeah, or
This
some
plus
say
20.
30. Some say 30 and do it.
Yeah. But yeah, if you start seeing a plethora of throwbacks, that
Yeah.
person's tossed in their tips for the off season, and they're just waiting to
They're
say they're in
counting down
prep.
the minutes to say they're in prep. Yeah, 100%. But all
But
right. I think that's a good return. A return for the Thinking
yeah.
Man's podcast. I think we're probably over an hour at this point. So um anything else? Anything you want to add or call out before we wrap?
That's all I got. We're right in the peak of contest season getting started, and we're putting out a long off season. So keep this
Yeah.
one bookmarked for you guys. If you haven't competed yet this year, listen to it after your show. Again, after you listen to it the first time, let it sink in.
Yeah. And even though it is like in the thick of contest season and prep season now, there's going to be a lot of people that get to 8 weeks out and realize they don't have nearly the amount of muscle that they had hoped that they had. And so this message is
Yep.
for you. This message is for you. Take your off season seriously. Put the time in the off season. Give yourself time to apply the surplus in the training, and you will come back better for it. So for Tommy Styles, I'm Joseph Pircher. This was a Thinking Man's podcast. Until next time, guys, we are out.